thrown into lava, stomped on, shot with rockets, stabbed in the chest, dying in space, being sent on suicide missions as cannon fodder. Today we're ranking Nintendo fates, gruesome to worse than death. We'll start with the characters who seem to have ended up with happy endings despite their misdeeds. These are the Merciful fates. Kicking things off with the franchise you least expected to be in the running today, Wisp from Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing isn't exactly the series you go to if you want deep lore or tragic backstories or anything like that, but if you want a cute little ghost who pays you in random objects to collect his little wisp pieces, which you caused him to drop in the first place, you're in luck. While he is dead, Wisp seems like a pretty happy, albeit frightful guy, and he's apparently wealthy enough to afford to offer you a sofa in exchange for catching a few miniature ghosts with a butterfly net. For all we know, the guy was just born as a rich ghost or something, so we'd say that out of all of the dead characters in Nintendo's library, he was dealt the easiest hand. Following Wisp is a group of characters who did have to face death, at least for a moment. The Lumas are some of the most adorable characters the Mario series has ever come up with. Most memorably, Mario's little buddy, known simply as Baby Luma, was always tagging along in Mario's hat to help him maneuver galaxies with a handy spin jump. Baby Luma walked so Cappy could run. Unfortunately, by the end of Mario Galaxy, the Lumas ran too. Ran right into the depths of a black hole that threatened to destroy all the galaxies they worked so hard to save. Now granted, we do get confirmation from Rosalina that Lumas are perpetually being reborn as stars, planets, galaxies, and other spatial bodies. Heck, we see it happen firsthand with the hungry Lumas throughout the whole game, but it didn't stop 7-year-old me from getting choked up at that cutscene, so we had to include it anyway, even if they were just doing what they were born to do. Rounding out this first category is the self-proclaimed King of Dreamland, King Dedede. Like most Nintendo rivals, King Dedede gets his butt kicked on a regular basis. The difference between King Dedede and characters like Bowser, King K. Rool, or Ganondorf is that despite his rivalry with the main character, Dedede is actually a genuinely good guy. He may have started out as a bully who stole food from the people and stars from the sky, but after Kirby befriended him, he began to truly care about his subjects, and is now a hero who will lay down his life to protect them from any threat that arises. King Dedede went from an oppressive monarch to a friend and big brother figure to his whole kingdom, and he's pretty happy with his usually peaceful life among his buddies. But that doesn't mean the great king can't be used by evildoers, and more often than not, various dark magic manipulators end up possessing Dreamland's mighty monarch to force him to try and kill his friendly rival. Given how often Dedede is forced to act against his own will, and how hard he struggles against these evil influences, especially in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, we have to say that this is probably one of the most psychologically painful fates on our list. Then there's the fact that in Dreamland 3 and 64, his stomach gets ripped open and tries to eat Kirby Pac-Man style, which adds an aspect of physical pain to it. Dedede always gets through it, but he always goes through it, you know? Even so, his life has improved overall since meeting Kirby, so we think this is a fair place for him. Now we'll move on to the characters who paid a higher price. These are the non-lethal punishments. First in this category, we have another Kirby character, Marx. While his spiritual successor Aguilar had a pretty good character arc after his debut, Marx was much more cut and dry about what he was about. He was a simple man, or a simple jester grape thingy. He let Kirby do all the dirty work of summoning a galactic nova, only to snatch his wish away at the very end in an attempt to rule Planet Popstar. After being knocked into Nova by Kirby, resulting in a huge explosion that would have easily been enough to kill pretty much any character outside of this series, Marx somehow survived. I'm not even talking about his fight in the true arena as Mark's soul, which technically isn't canon, but in Star Allies, he's brought back as a dream friend where he's just fine. Heck, he doesn't even seem to have atone for his sins like Aguilar, or to have changed at all. The dude just straight up came back because he was hungry and bored. But I guess as long as he's mass murdering with us instead of against us, we can let him stick around. Kirby's friend turned enemy turned true friend from another dimension, Aguilar is next. After being thoroughly whooped by Kirby and his friends, the Master Crown's full power took over Aguilar's mind and body, turning him into a soulless husk of his normal self. Notably, after his defeat, Aguilar does straight up die here. Like, we literally see his soul fade away. But he was fortunate enough to get another chance in the Aguilar epilogue mode of Return to Dreamland Deluxe, which is one of the few times the Kirby series has explained one of these seemingly inexplicable revivals. Although he starts off feeling vengeful in the epilogue, you can see through his own descriptions of his new moves that he's starting to prioritize getting back to his friends and helping others over gaining power for himself. It all culminates in a showdown with the Master Crown itself, and despite having an opportunity to use its power for himself again, Aguilar opts to use that power to start a lucrative gem apple business to raise money for an amusement park he can use as an apology for Kirby. It's a genuinely sweet redemption arc, so despite his initial death looking pretty painful, we think Aguilar's earned a low spot on this list for learning his lesson and living a happy life traveling the world with his new friends. And now we have a character who's nowhere near as wholesome, King K. Rool. There are a lot of villains in this temporarily defeated category in discussion today, and King K. Rool might be the most pure example of it. K. Rool never gets straight up killed during his battles with the Kongs, but he does get roughed up pretty severely. which is to be expected since he tries to do everything from theft to kidnapping to straight up attempted genocide. For such an unapologetically evil dude, King K. Rool never really has to pay too much penance for his misdeeds. He gets beaten up in cartoonishly violent ways and returns for his next scheme, even if his only scheme for the past few decades was to be a terrifying Smash Bros fighter. Hey, we're not complaining, he earned that spot, and he's fun to play. For our final character in this category, we have Bowser. A list like this couldn't be complete without discussing our favorite Koopa King. To Bowser's credit, the guy is durable as all heck. He's survived countless thrashings from Mario, Luigi, sometimes even Peach. Most often, his demise comes in the form of being dunked into lava. We can't place him any higher since he has consistently survived these attacks, but considering he's also had his skin melted off by them several times, we certainly can't say it didn't hurt. It makes sense that Bowser can survive this, though. I think with all the simple fire breathing he does, we sometimes tend to forget that Bowser is a master of dark magic. And given how hard he tries to take over the world or kidnap princesses, endangering his troops and even his son in the process, it's hard to say that he doesn't have it coming. I want to rethink that bridge design, big guy, hire an architect or something. But with Bowser defeated until the next console comes out, it's time to talk about the characters with more final endings. They are the instantaneous ends. First up is the noble Goomba. It's one thing to be a boss battle who goes down swinging during an uncharacteristically epic fight with a chubby Italian guy. It's an entirely different thing, however, to be one of a species whose whole purpose in life is basically to be used as pawns so your king can succeed. Goombas are constantly marching into battle and getting stomped, burned, frozen, or otherwise murdered by Mario and company. Even if they're quick deaths, it's gotta seriously sting to die that suddenly when you've been trained to go into Bowser's army for presumably your whole life, a training regime that apparently didn't include, hey, maybe don't walk off a cliff. Next, we have an entry for the countless Pikmin from the Pikmin series. Look, I'm not gonna act like Pikmin is secretly this super dark, twisted series or anything, unless you count whatever the heck Louis was doing. But one thing's for sure, Pikmin die a lot. Like, a lot. Whether they drown, get crushed, get eaten, fall off cliffs, or whatever else, you're almost guaranteed to lose some of those tiny soldiers as you play the game. It may not be a bloodbath or anything, but seeing their little ghosts float away and hearing those tiny cries will definitely pull at your heartstrings. Now let's unfold our next entry. Olivia was nothing short of a total ray of sunshine throughout the entirety of the Origami King, but her final wish would be her own undoing. It's unclear whether Olivia realized that wishing for all of her brother's origami to be unfolded would have meant her own death, but in any case, she would be peacefully wiped out of existence alongside her brother's creations. The saddest thing about this death is the fact that she could have probably saved herself if she just worded things differently, which begs a question of whether this was done purposely out of guilt for defeating her racist brother. So, let's move on before we make that scene even sadder. By the way, honorable mention to Bobby, who went out in an explosion to clear a way for Mario and Olivia to go further on their journey. I guess we're just gonna pretend bombs in the older games didn't survive exploding multiple times then. Okay, alright. How about one more good guy to round out this category? Next up is James McCloud, the father of the titular Star Fox himself. James McCloud was the leader of the original Team Star Fox, whose only remaining member is Peppy. This would be because, after the greed-driven betrayal of Pigma Dengar, James and the others were led right into Andross's clutches. While it's not known exactly how James died, given how Andross still holds a grudge against James and his son years later, we can't assume he'd have gone easy on his arch nemesis. Still, he didn't have his soul evaporated or anything, so he at least got a more merciful ending than the villains in Star Fox, or rather, more merciful than any of the characters in this category. These are the gruesome deaths. Dementio was one of, if not the most dangerous villain Mario has ever faced. Like, let's not forget that this guy single-handedly sent Mario, Bowser, and Peach to hell for one chapter. His ultimate plan was unveiled when he used the Chaos Heart, a heart almost as black as Dementio's, to fuse with Luigi and become a monster of near unstoppable power. Even after being defeated by the gang and straight up exploding, he managed to leave just a teensy bit of his newfound godlike power behind to keep the Chaos Heart on its path to destruction, only stopped by the sacrifice of Count Bleck and Tippy. Twilight Princess is one of Zelda's most morbid games, and Zant is one of its most morbid aspects. This power-hungry madman was a traitor to his family and to his nation as a whole. Growing up in the royal family, he expected that he was to be the next to rule, only for his own lust for power to be his downfall. Out of jealousy of the rightful ruler, Midna, and desperation to expand his own empire, Zant joined forces with Ganon, usurping the throne and turning his own people into monstrous husks of their former selves, essentially using them as unwilling war machines. This depraved alliance with Ganon made him a bit too cocky for his own good, though. After being defeated by Link and Midna, the latter got a little tired of Zant's smug attitude and decided to give him a nice, explosive stab in the tummy. Link, you might want to watch out around her. From the underling to the overling, next we have Ganondorf, who, much like Bowser, has been killed countless times throughout his series. Although it's never permanent, since Ganon has the power of the Triforce to keep him coming back, he's gone through pretty painful demises countless times. What's more, we feel even less sympathy for him than we do for villains like Bowser, since Ganondorf doesn't even have a cute bond with a Ganondorf Jr. or anything. The guy's a scumbag who consistently deserves what's coming to him. His most brutal death, however, was in Wind Waker, in which he was killed in his human form, or like his human adjacent form, Gerudo, whatever. Here, he's not only stabbed in the chest by Link, he's straight up turned to stone while he's still alive, allowing him to be hit with the full force of a flood. Either he suffocated, drowned, or was broken to pieces by the force of the water, but either way, this was without a doubt the most vicious lesson Ganon's ever been taught, even if we all know he won't learn from it. Dino Piranha is undeniably one of the most messed up bosses in Mario history. I'm sure that probably sounds like an exaggeration, but just reminisce with me, will you? In the first main galaxy in Super Mario Galaxy, we come into contact with a giant dinosaur egg that just so happens to belong to the aforementioned Dino Piranha. Ignoring the fact that Dino Piranha's parents are nowhere to be seen, deadbeats, Mario proceeds to immediately start whacking this newborn dinosaur's tail back into its body, then continues to do so until it literally explodes, saying wahoo, waha, like he's riding a roller coaster. We're not on the Mario's a sociopath bandwagon by any means, but this is one of those moments that we just can't defend him for. Like, how would he even know that this thing had a power star? And even if he did, couldn't he just, I don't know, ask the literal goddess he just met for help getting it out instead of killing this baby animal?
I shall dispose of you quickly and then eat you for lunch,
Kakaletta said calmly. Superstar Saga was a fun game, and Kakaletta was a fun villain. She really had all those pure evil Saturday morning cartoon vibes she was going for, and that includes just how much she inexplicably survived. From being beaten almost to death by Mario and Luigi, to getting her soul vacuumed up by Fawful's helmet while she was slowly fading away, to straight up instantly possessing then transitioning Bowser into a woman, Kakaletta was determined to win, which is why it must have been pretty frustrating for her to get the tar beaten out of her literal soul itself by Mario and Luigi. Hey, if it's any consolation, Kakaletta, you did have the only hard boss fight in the game. Good on you. But while Kakaletta's demise was brutal, the hardworking Fawful certainly took a few pages from his former boss's book. By the end of Superstar Saga, Fawful realized how hard he was carrying Kakaletta throughout the adventure, and resolved to slowly but surely take over the world. His plan was quite simple, really. Basically, he would bioengineer a virus to make the Toads fat so that Bowser would buy drugs, vor the Mario Brothers, and get beaten up by a pig. Very basic stuff here. Unfortunately, like Kakaletta, Fawful ended up getting beaten a lot throughout the game, ultimately fusing with the Dark Star and becoming little more than a vessel for it to use in order to rule the world. The only light side to Fawful's fate was that he was able to go out on his own terms, blowing up inside Bowser, well, that sounds wrong, and getting one last chance to kill his green and red rivals. Ironically, since this is what freed them from Bowser's body, he just ended up helping them at the end of the day, adding one big insult to a whole host of injuries. It's time to get back to the Kirby villains with Queen Sectonia. What started as her friend Taranza giving her a mirror as a gift turned slowly but surely into Sectonia's mind becoming completely warped by the dark powers inside of the mirror. She went from a benevolent queen to an abusive tyrant who planned to control the entire world and shape it to suit her vision. Sectonia would actually come pretty close to beating Kirby, and if it weren't for Dedede and Taranza coming to save him at the last second with a hammer and a miracle fruit, she very well may have. Unfortunately for Sectonia, even that gigantic supernova-looking laser she had up her sleeve was no match for Kirby's hypernova. Kirby managed to straight up eat this gigantic laser and spit it right back at her, tearing her apart bit by bit and putting Sectonia out of her misery in the process. Yeah, sorry Taranza, I couldn't really do much else there. Let's go a lot further into outer space to talk about Andross. Given how he's the final boss of basically every Star Fox game, Andross might seem like one of those villains who's never really defeated, but that surprisingly isn't the case. In Star Fox 64, he had his body blown up when Fox and the gang blew up his lair on planet Venom, with only his spirit inexplicably surviving the blast. That leads us to Star Fox Adventures, where Andross uses the power of the Krazoa spirits to keep himself alive and basically attempt to become a god. He's the embodiment of that local man too angry to die meme, basically. Being blown up yet again though, this time with his very soul being the main target of the explosion. There's not a lot of wiggle room for Andross's final fate. Just enough wiggle room for him to keep coming back as a cool final boss though. Next we have an entry whose existence is under constant threat of destruction in its game, everyone in Majora's Mask. Even if you're not familiar with the game, the sight of that creepy looking moon should be at least most of the explanation you need for why this entry got so high up on our list. The conflict of Majora's Mask as a whole is basically, hey, play this specific song within 72 hours or the moon is going to nuke everybody in the world you're exploring. The fact that the game over scenario for Majora's Mask implies that every character in the game just brutally died in an inescapable explosion of cosmic proportions makes it one of the most terrifying, brutal deaths in Nintendo history by a long shot. But it also makes for a great motivation to save the day. But now it's time to talk about a certain iconic alien dragon from Metroid. Ridley? Who's that? I'm talking about Kraid. This icon hardly needs introduction. When Samus isn't confronting horrifying masterminds like the Mother Brain, she's probably fighting horrifying animalistic aliens like Kraid. He appeared in both Metroid and Super Metroid as a major boss, seemingly defeated and killed in the latter. That was until his return in Metroid Dread. Kraid was chained up by the Chozo warriors and held in captivity by Kataris in a pool of lava. Honestly, no wonder the guy's so ticked off. Imagine waiting for decades for your shot at revenge, only to have to fight your nemesis handicapped and to end up submerged in lava. Still, as painful as this demise surely was, we have to take into account two possibilities. One, this could very well be a different Kraid with as many races and species as the Metroid series has shown us over the years. It's not a stretch to assume there are more Kraids out there. And two, if this is the same Kraid we fought in the first couple of games, well, I mean, he was durable enough to survive being blown up by Samus. Who's to say he couldn't survive being submerged in lava? Especially since he's been soaking in it like a bathtub. Now we finally reach my personal favorite Metroid villain, Ravenbeak. Ravenbeak was the definition of a mastermind, a proud Chozo warrior and leader of the Makin tribe. He planned on using the power of the Metroids to achieve world domination, and was willing to slaughter literally all but one of an entire race of Chozo in order to do this. But as calculating as he was, Ravenbeak would fall victim to Samus at the very end. Just when he thinks he has his daughter unconscious in a chokehold, she literally grabs him through the eye as he thrashes in pain. Her Metroid DNA now fully awakened. Samus's newfound strength would end up crushing Ravenbeak's entire base onto the surface of ZDR, which Ravenbeak still somehow survived just long enough to be infected with an X-parasite. Unfortunately for Ravenbeak, this last sliver of hope for revenge would be dashed to pieces as Samus fired a brand new death laser at him. And to add insult to injury, she didn't even absorb his X-power. Honestly, knowing Ravenbeak, that was probably a very smart decision. We could have very well ended up with another dark matter situation on our hands. And here we are at our next entry, Fecto Forgo. It turned out that the Elfilin is secretly evil and Elfilin is good theories were both correct when it came to Kirby and the Forgotten Lands final boss. Elfilin had an evil half who, when combined with himself, created a terrifying creature known as Fecto Elfilis, who made its grand debut by invading the planet of the Forgotten Land and terrorizing everyone therein. And naturally, they weren't about to let that slide, so they built a chamber custom made to contain Elfilis' power and kept it locked up for decades. 30 years into the experiments Elfilis was subjected to in the researchers' attempts to harness its powers of interdimensional travel for themselves, an incident occurred that separated Elfilin and allowed him to escape. And as for Elfilis, it plotted its revenge by possessing strong beasts like Leon and even King Dedede, planning to reunite with its other half and regain its true power through them. So, in summary, Fecto Forgo is the result of a godlike wild animal being put in a cage for decades, treated as both a science experiment and a circus attraction, and ultimately being murdered by its other half's new friend by getting hit by a truck. You really just can't make things up with Kirby final bosses, huh? The only thing keeping us from placing this death any higher is the fact that after defeating Chaos Elfilis in the Ultimate Cup Z, we see Elfilin absorb a tiny piece of Fecto into himself, giving the alien's malicious half a chance to live peacefully with his other half. Such a peaceful end couldn't belong to the monstrous Ridley. Honestly, this guy probably has the most wiggle room out of any character on this list. Many fans consider Ridley's death in Super Metroid to be his canonical death. On one hand, that does make complete sense. I mean, we literally see him explode and fall to pieces after Samus kicks his butt. On the other hand, Kraid, if he came back, who's to say Ridley couldn't? And come back he did in Metroid Prime as Meta Ridley, a new and improved version of his old self, complete with robotic enhancements. It does pay to be the leader of a ruthless squad of space pirates, doesn't it? Doesn't pay enough to beat Samus, but it pays nonetheless. Following Ridley is his former boss, Mother Brain. She may not be anywhere near as iconic as Ridley, and definitely not as iconic as the universally beloved complex character Kraid, but Mother Brain made more than enough impact on players. She's revealed in the Metroid manga to be a sentient AI created by the Chozo, who ultimately betrayed them to control the space pirates instead. Yeah, but AI totally isn't taking jobs from perfectly reasonable space dictators like Kraid, right? Well, no matter. Mother Brain would meet her end at Samus's hands, and Rockets, which, considering how Mother Brain is literally an exposed brain and eyeball in a jar, must have been an absolutely brutal way to go. And closing out this category, we have a guy who screamed real good when he died, Pigma. Seriously, screw this guy. He's so greedy and self-centered that even Wolf, a straight-up mass murderer, kicks him out from sheer disgust with his, well, everything. While he survived being shot down by Team Star Fox the first time, Pigma might have ended up regretting that. In Star Fox's assault, Pigma fell victim to infection by the Aparoids, who slowly corrupted his already corrupt mind, transforming him into a monstrous superweapon fought as one of the final bosses. Even seeing him scream and explode seemed like an easy way for this serial traitor to go, but man, if it wasn't satisfying. Without further ado, it's time to move on to the characters who suffered fates worse than death. We just have to mention the poor, cursed Twilly to start this category off. You guys know that Shibuya incident arc from Jujutsu Kaisen, right? If you do, then yeah, that's the vibe we got from these guys. Imagine being turned into a mindless monster against your will, forced to commit atrocities while in this state, only to maybe be saved later on after a lot of the damage has already been done. To be fair though, they at least were saved and therefore given the chance to pursue presumably normal lives after this tragedy, so we have to call this the least horrific fate in our final category. Following the Tweely, we have, am I reading this right? Okay, it's Crow from Donkey Kong Country 2? This is definitely a contender for the most weirdly specific inclusion on this list. It's bad enough that this guy used his own unborn children to defend himself from Diddy and Dixie, but to do that and come back as a ghost later on as a totally different boss fight? I've heard of being haunted by your sins, but this is ridiculous!
I've heard of an existence devoid of purpose, but this is ridiculous.
Nah, seriously, this is literally an undead animal watching his undead children die again at the hands of their murderers before his ghost finally explodes because a monkey hit him with enough barrels. It's a shame Donkey Kong doesn't have pause screen lore like Kirby games, because I would love to know what was going through Crow's head at literally any given moment of this battle. We've finally reached our top 3, and the bronze medal of brutality goes to President Haltman. Max Prophet Haltman, yes, that's his real name, already had a rough life even before his run-in with Kirby. After a tragic accident transported his daughter to another dimension, Haltman poured his entire soul into the Haltman Works Company. And I mean, like, he literally did. His wish-granting supercomputer, Stardream, slowly drove him to madness to the point where he forgot what he built it for in the first place, eventually becoming nothing more than a shell of his former self. Oh, if only that were where it ended, though. Haltman's soul wasn't just being corrupted by Stardream, it was being overwritten, and by the time Susie turned on him, he was nothing more than a mouthpiece for Stardream itself. But just in case you aren't fully convinced that Haltman belongs so far up on our list, well, look at the true arena. Here, instead of just being drilled in half by Kirby and his Robobot armor, Stardream's core inhales Kirby, forcing him to take it down from the inside. While in here, as you break the pieces of Nova Jr.'s core, you can hear Haltman moaning in pain. While this confrontation itself may not be canon, it does give us a look into what Haltman was going through in the main game's final showdown. A look that indicates that throughout the entire final battle with Stardream, Haltman felt everything. He could feel every shot, every star bullet, every meteor, every straight up drill through the brain that Kirby hit him with. And as far beyond help as Haltman was, you can't deny that that's a cruel way to go even for him. Not to mention, he just remembered his daughter in his final moments when it was too late to do anything about it. The Silver Medal of Evil goes to a character who lost even more loved ones and went through even more hardships after the fact. Quiet Robe from Metroid Dread. Quiet Robe already went through the pain of seeing his entire tribe, the Thoha, be brutally executed by Ravenbeak and the rest of the Mawkins while he was forced to labor under them to help with Ravenbeak's plans. Mind you, this wasn't just before the events of Dread, it was before Samus wiped out the Metroids. Quiet Robe was forced to serve the man who killed all his family and friends for years before Samus arrived, and he was barely just able to brief her on her mission before being fatally shot by a robot Chozo soldier. But being the absolute king that he is, Quiet Robe still wasn't done being a hero yet. Despite being infected by an X and reactivating the enemy that he himself just shut down, Quiet Robe appears in the grand finale to help Samus one last time, allowing her to absorb him to neutralize her newfound Metroid powers just long enough to power up her ship and go home before the planet exploded. Quiet Robe may have died, but at least he died a hero, and despite all he'd been through, he was able to be at peace in his final moments. Now, we could say the same thing about our golden medalist of brutality, but we could say it infinitely more times for Void Termina. In Kirby Star Allies, we finally got an answer to one of the series' greatest mysteries, dark matter. For those who aren't overly familiar with Kirby, dark matter is the demonic entity that manifests itself in many forms throughout the franchise, trying to corrupt the purity of Dreamland and Kirby himself, with Void Termina being the canonical origin of every form of dark matter we've seen in the series. But even though Void Termina is pure evil, given how its only goal is to spread darkness, chaos, and destruction across the entire universe, his fate is one of the few cruel enough to make us pity even him. According to the Ultimate Choice's final difficulty, Soul Melter EX, Void is doomed to be reincarnated every time it's defeated. One of those reincarnations was Kirby, lucky him. He gets to enjoy snacks, snaps, and adventures with his friends. Another of these reincarnations was Zero from Kirby's Dream Land 3, a gigantic bleeding eyeball who felt nothing but a desire to shroud the world in darkness. This basically happens ad nauseum every time there's a new variant of dark matter in the series. Like, I felt bad misplaying in a game of Magic last night, but this guy is being murdered and reborn indefinitely, which is a rough ride for even such a monstrous being. And the fact that Void straight up smiles when you finish killing it makes it all the more clear how cruel this thing's existence is.